Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. What you got to remember is what you're looking at is also you. Everyone you're looking at is also you. You could be that person.
At the centre of this story is the South African apartheid and the black consciousness movement that sprung in resistance to oppression. For those who are unfamiliar or in need of a refresh, apartheid was the policy that defined racial segregation between the white and non-white populations of South Africa throughout the 20th century. All individual liberties were restricted through this infrastructure, which dictated what homes, jobs, rights, etc. non-white people, but intentionally Bantu Africans could have. In every conceivable way, they were treated as second-class humans. While apartheid ended in the early 90s, ideologies, biases and the afterglow systems of oppression still very much exist in the region. There were several rallies and movements in the decades leading up to the end of apartheid, which applied pressure on the state and spread both awareness and motivation for the people to mobilise against their oppressors. One such movement which dominated the 70s was known as the Black Consciousness Movement. Led by Steve Biko, this Steve Biko, also that Steve Biko, BCM sought to encourage oppressed people, but especially black people and Bantu Africans, to recognise their shared oppression and come together collectively and in solidarity to liberate themselves from their oppressors and colonisers. A big platform black consciousness was communicated through was art. Now, art activism and political art and protest art have been an ever-present practice within art history, and you can find a plethora of discussions on this strain of art and various questions around it like, is all art political or whatever. But how I see it, this period of the 20th century where you're witnessing or a part of a rise in global resistance and anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, art really grew as a grassroots democratic wavelength for ideas to spread. Art during this period was used so passionately as a means to communicate when media was so centralised that organising, growing and raising awareness for any of the actual messages within movements like this was an extremely difficult, tactful endeavour. Anyway, within South African apartheid, art was a key tool to spread and instill these positive ideas of blackness and black liberation, and the most accessible medium to achieve this through was drawing. One of the most special and prominent artists within the BCM ranks was Fikile Magadlela. Magadlela was a leading voice in anti-apartheid art and black consciousness. His works are key influences for the subject of black surrealism, although they don't fall into that motif themselves, more on that argument later. And his art is a key look into this period of burgeoning ideas around blackness in connection to its surroundings, both natural and anthrocentric. Despite his role and contribution to BCM, because of escalating pressure from the state, police harassment, including a period of time Magadlela spent in prison, and exploitative gallery practices which Magadlela protested against, and as such was likely shunned from most art institutions, Magadlela's work isn't nearly as documented as it should be, with many artworks not recorded or in circulation, and realistically Fikile didn't have the facility to make as much work as his creativity and skill suggests because of his imprisonment, but also because as a black artist there weren't the financial opportunities like exhibitions and shows to support a consistent art practice. Magadlela only had roughly 8 recorded exhibition appearances to his name. His online presence is limited and patchy against other voices in BCM who have found more publicity later in life to communicate their body of work. However, this does not take away from the power and impact of his work that we do have to engage with, nor the legacy and impact Magadlela has had on both South African anti-colonialism and themes of black identity within art history. It just means we have to look a little deeper to piece together this artist's journey. For instance, we can learn a lot about Magadlela's experiences through the collective activity of artists in BCM, such as Tammy Nyele, who was friends with Fikile, operating in the same art political circles, and someone who lived shared experiences of targeted abuse by the state in an attempt to suffocate their voice. I must also mention Shannon Hill, who paved the road for this video through their fantastic documentation and exploration into black consciousness art. To learn more, I direct you to read Call Me Not a Man by Mthunzini Mashobha, more on him in part 2, and Biko's Ghost by Shannon Hill. Fikile Magadlela was a special artist, self-taught, expressive, texture was a big part of his work, and his initial pathway into art as a child, repurposing the dust and shavings from his graphite pencil, a practice he carried throughout his body of work, using these shavings to create this palpable depth and the environmental characters or presence in his scenes. Now, tactile would be the expected word to use there, but the reason I chose palpable is because I feel these rocks in my fingers when looking at the drawing. the grain and authenticity of the marks on the page build a realism that's so exciting to fake feel. Magadlela was sociable and absorbed a lot of art from his peers and mentors, which definitely fed into his constantly evolving art style. The most significant of these influences was Shadiso Andrew Motawadi, a similar self-taught artist that preceded Magadlela in the 60s, passing away at the end of the decade. A strong reference can be pulled from the way Motawadi depicted anatomy, the skin, veins and muscles of his characters holding stylistic weight. Motawadi's graphite works are really amazing to look at, and in terms of the use of texture, I feel as though a clear lineage can be drawn where artists from the 60s, best characterised through Motawadi, built this depth and expressive style which Magadlela developed in facets and applied to his poetic scenes of black consciousness. The reason I love Magadlela's artwork is because he ultimately used his art to express the spiritual beauty of life, its connectedness and completeness, and the significance of black bodies within that. There's this duality to his work of gentle grandeur. Life is an eternal flow and inspires my art. This can be seen across his known body of work, from Formation to Unidentified Angel, pessimistic and meditative of the future. Fikili is always in this heart of depicting calm, ever-existing scenes that feel like celestial truths. Sorry for all these noun phrases, I haven't even used the worst ones. When I first slow looked at Formation, clearly my favourite of these artworks, I wrote down celestial cadence and graceful might, which feels so dorky. It's quite hard to explain, and in all honesty, I don't know the validity of these ideas, it's merely my interpretation. I hope you see something different or new in these works that I haven't. I double hope you don't gatekeep your interpretation and instead share with the group, feedback to us. What I mean when I say ever-existing is that Magadlela's presentation of these ideas of blackness woven with nature feel like images in a storybook explaining the universe. And in that way, I don't look at these artworks and immediately connect it with apartheid or even really oppression in that sense. These characters feel like they transcend our human evils. They feel timeless. To me, that's the voice and expression of Fikili Magadlela, who made art that responded to what's in front of him without sacrificing its longevity or relevance. Before I conclude part 1, I said I'd explain why Magadlela's art isn't itself black surrealism. This is because his work is never fantastical, it's never a dream or magical. These artworks are literal in their depiction, their visualization of black consciousness. To connect with this artwork is to assimilate with the ideology, and in this way, Fikili Magadlela is, as Shannon Hill puts it, the epitome of black consciousness art in the 70s. Another way of looking at it is that surrealism isn't the intention of the artwork. Expression is. His art is about looking into our existing world to see these images, metaphors, allegories for interpreting the very real plane of humanity, or for him, South Africa. This is why I feel Magadlela is such a special artist as an art activist and an expressive storyteller. I'm simply in love with how he captures and communicates ideas and the subtle power with which he does this, whether that's through the involvement of nature or the technicals, the use of charcoal and application of drawing. I really just like his work, okay?